the delay. Well, shoot. And also for the fact that I can never get the Mac to work. Okay. Do you have an agenda?
Yeah.
Can I see it, please? Okay.
So here, just call to
Right.
order, and then roll call, and then pledge of allegiance.
We have to do the roll call. Call to order, roll call. Who are we missing?
Ask who to call the roll. and-
Oh, we want to do a verbal roll call. Okay.
And that's,
Everybody's on Zoom?
Nobody's on Zoom.
no
so-
one's on Zoom.
Do we expect them to be on Zoom?
So Richard and Pat.
Yeah, do we,
Mr. Graham, just, can you let us know if they log into Zoom, please?
but we don't have any word about whether they're coming or not. All right, after that confusing thing, let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Johnson,
Yes,
just
sir.
before you go on, because I'll be leaving probably before we get to the policy part, with the discussion for the resolution, it's going to be a discussion. I did not let Mr. Boberski know, and to be able to pass anything, I believe either the secretary or the assistant board secretaries have to be here, and neither of them are tonight. So it strictly has to be a discussion, and I apologize because honestly, Mr. Boberski got on the last minute knowing I was going to bring that as part of the president's report. So the only thing we can do, and I'll take the blame for it, but it can only simply be discussion tonight. Can't be any motion to pass it, defeat it,
Okay.
whatever. So, again,
Since-
sorry,
Next
but
meeting, buildings and ground.
it would be brought up at Buildings and Grounds then.
So we
if
don't need to discuss it tonight?
That's,
The discussion can occur tonight.
Occur,
The
yeah,
vote will be
might be
taken at
better.
Buildings
The
and
vote's
Grounds.
later.
The
Well,
only vote that we could take would be a procedural vote
Right.
to advance it or to table it.
Well,
I mean,
the-
that would be the only vote. We can't take official action on it.
I understood. I'm asking because Mike's daughter is in a concert tonight. Do
Right,
we
and
want to
I'm-
discuss it now before you have to leave?
sure, I'm going to leave at 10 after 6, so I can go home and go with her to the elementary
Right.
concert.
So do we want to make an adjustment?
That's
No,
up to Mr. Donato. I'm
No,
fine with making.
I'm okay with, I'm okay with, you can just
Does it make
continue
more
with the
sense?
agenda as it is and continue.
Leave it.
on.
In other words, not discuss it tonight?
No,
Is
you
that what
can
you're saying?
discuss it.
Okay.
All right. I make a motion to amend the agenda to move item 6 above item 3.
I'm sorry. We are trying to do something, if that was addressed to us. So,
Yeah.
do I have a second on this motion to amend the agenda?
This would allow Mr. Donato to participate in the discussion,
I don't have to on my part. I expressed
Okay.
how I felt about it at the,
Second. Can I
Okay.
second it?
Yep, okay.
Yep. All right. Any discussion?
Motion by Keno, second by Johnston. All right, any discussion?
No? It's just rearranging the agenda. That's all we're doing.
Just moving it up.
No discussion? All in favor? Okay, motion passes. Okay, Mr. Donato, the floor is yours then, please.
oh, okay. Actually, you all right, Mr. Keener?
Yes, please.
Okay. To make it, to carry on from Tuesday night, I brought the resolution up, which I believe if you click on the thing should appear and come up, which it does, and it's up on the screens. So you've heard my thoughts about it. I don't think it's going to do any harm. I don't think it's going to do any good. The only advantage I could see doing this is if you take it to, if you meet with our representatives doing this. As Mr. Boberski said, they don't they've told him, and I tend to believe that too, they don't really listen to emails or letters. The actual phone conversation or physically visiting them is probably the best way to use this. About the only other thing, I believe PSBA recommended this, so we can, the other advantage would be PSBA, when they lobby, which they do for school funding, they could say we're one of however many districts passed a resolution doing this. So that's my part of it. So anyone else? Thoughts?
Any other discussion?
I agree that it's not going to do a lot of good. They see these all the time, and at the end of the day, sadly, it probably doesn't mean much. My question would be, and I don't see any problem with this resolution, my question would be, are there any other districts in the county doing this? Not that we have to do exactly what they're doing, but does anybody know?
I believe Manheim Township has already passed a resolution. I'm not certain of that, but I'm fairly certain that they've passed a resolution.
I'd just like to say, like, I'm glad it's public and it's there for the Hempfield public to use and to use as a guideline and to gather information and know more about the Basic Education Funding Committee and their recommendations. So I like as a board that we're putting that out there as a way, as for use for the community to advocate for public school funding.
And I'd rather err on the side of caution, like it might help, it won't hurt. So I think doing anything we can to help. And I will say too that my letters that I have written, noting that I am a board member to the various representatives, I have gotten specific letters back from them. So I think that does carry some weight when you address it to them in your role as a board member.
Just a thought, is it possible to do joint resolution with all the schools in Lancaster County? Has that ever been thought of? Is that a possibility?
Everything is possible. Do you want to coordinate that?
I didn't say I wanted to coordinate it.
That
I
might be
think
the
that's more
hardest.
of the
I just
issue
said,
than anything else.
If they see something from multiple schools, from the whole county, might have a little bit more chance of
And I think
helping.
if we each at least begin to do it individually, then maybe that could spur that momentum. Our time is short as far as
Well, let's-
gathering all that information and the schedule of school boards across the county, getting it all coordinated. But I think everyone that can do it individually is helpful.
Well, I would have potential opportunity. I could bring this up at an IU meeting because I have all the representatives and see if there'd be an interest, so.
That would be.
I like that idea, Mr. Maris. And,
I'm not saying they'll want to do it,
right, no.
but I can ask the
understood,
question.
Understood.
'Cause we talk about this all the time there, too.
I'm ambivalent about this resolution, and this is why. I think we can all agree that Pennsylvania's system for funding public education needs a lot of work. I don't know that we would all agree on exactly what work it needs. And I think that explains why there is a majority and minority report from the BEFC on this issue. I am hesitant to support a resolution that embraces one part of that report when we have not seen a detailed financial analysis of how this would impact Hempfield. I would be supportive of a resolution that is much more general, that encourages the General Assembly to comply with the constitutional mandate to provide a fair and appropriate public education, to look at charter school reform, and to, number 8, consider other important issues. I am hesitant and most likely will not be able to support a resolution at this level of specificity when I don't understand the full ramifications of what it is that we're supporting. So if we want to go on record as encouraging the General Assembly to more robustly fund public education, to look at charter school reform, all of that I can get behind 100%. But I'm not going to get behind an overly granular resolution that supports part of the BEFC, but not the other part, when I haven't seen the detailed analysis of how that would impact the district that I represent.
You know, and just to coattail off of what you just said, Mr. Keener, I agree with you. I would feel better about supporting something like that than this. It's not that this is wrong or bad or I'm concerned about it. I just think what you just suggested is better. And I think it makes a lot more sense as a general rule than us just outlining it to this specificity and then approving a resolution that isn't all-inclusive without all the information. I agree with you. It's a little uncomfortable for me,
Yeah.
even though I wasn't ready to say I wouldn't support it, for the reasons that you expressed.
To me, it's not granular at all. It's not specific, and I think that's why the administration worked on it, so it wasn't specific one way or the other. It was the things that both reports had in it, and I think that was communicated, that it was both, it wasn't one specific or the other, and that's why I think we should get behind it as a board as well. But these aren't specifics, because there are very specific things that Mike Bremersky went into detail when he presented about the basic education funding and, you know, the different sides and things, but this is not granular like that. And so that's what I like about it.
Is it correct we would need all 9 board members to be supportive of it to move it forward? That's my understanding. That it could not be an 8-1, it's
Yeah,
not a
I think
majority
it would
vote.
be-
It has to be unanimous?
That's a great question. I don't see, you know,
Thought
again,
it
if
had
you,
to be unanimous.
again, to use it for the purpose like I would describe, I think it would be better, like if I was going to see Representative Miller and I took this along, it would be better to have all 9 signatures on the back, but I'm not actually sure what is needed.
Because I'm where you are, Mr. Keener. I would feel better about it if there were adjustments made to your specific points.
I mean, the bottom line here is the Assembly, our state government doesn't want to assume a straight formula, and it's still divvied out, and there's hold harmless, and it's still divvied out based on, they don't use a formula like many other states do, so we could simplify this a lot more, I think.
No,
that-
they do. Like,
But isn't it just a formula with new money each year?
yeah, it's with the new money.
But all the other old money is still
Right,
divvied
it's
out.
It's slowly coming down.
Right, but
The-
that's
the new
gonna take
money's-
forever.
Yeah, sorry, but unless we live to be 110,
I mean, I think
We're
at
not
the end of
going to see it.
end of the day, it's the legislature won't agree on using a set formula for fear that some of the representatives in certain parts of the state will lose a lot of money because they won't get as much.
My
So-
understanding is that no one loses money, that the recommendations are that there needs to be an influx of new money added,
Right.
and that
Well, what it
everybody
is
gets some more.
each year the new
The
money.
majority gets some
But
more.
that's not fixing the problem. The problem is all the old money is divided up. I don't know who, somebody figures it out somewhere, but they don't use the formula and they use hold harmless. So counties, schools that are losing kids, they don't get less money because the legislator would probably not get reelected if he said, hey, you're getting less money because we're losing population. That's the big problem with this, I think, on the bottom line. I mean,
I think we need to be concerned about Hempfield, and this would bring significant money to Hempfield. And I don't understand a public school board that would not support that. Like, I'm pretty focused on Hempfield.
That's just one formula, though. I mean, we don't
We're
know.
not This does not, the resolution does not specify any formula.
So
That's
how
where-
does that get Hempfield more money if we haven't said what we're going to do?
It's not up to us. That's not our job. That's the legislator's job. But it's our job to ask for it. It's our job to advocate for it. That's what I'm saying. It's their job to figure out
But-
how. But
But that battle's already there. They've been fighting it for
Yeah.
years, so
If,
I have a question.
we need something more
Just-
specific. and
Go
more
ahead.
general.
Well,
Just not
if this resolution was revised in some way, could you support that?
what are you looking to change?
If
I-
it
I'm
were revised in
not-
the manner that I suggested, I would wholeheartedly support it.
I think that-
Likewise.
one of the things,
What? Yeah.
and I'm not if I remember from Mr. Bomersky's presentation, one of the things, if you go through, like, if you just go through the line items of those, number one, I think the first part of that, and I'm not 100% positive, but going through that, if you go from the sentence, provide at least 20 million increase going down, that is part of the majority report. But I think both of the reports agree that they should use a 3-year average when they're doing the calculations. I think both of the reports agree on number 2 and number 3. I think the one that really comes out from the majority report of that is that bottom, provide at least $200 million increase through that, because that would be part, if you remember when we first discussed the budget and this was brought up, that's where we could possibly, if they funded it completely, we would get $1.8 million extra.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh.
Oh, no,
I think this discussion illustrates why we should have a more general resolution. Because I don't think any of us can say with certainty what exactly the impact is of all 8 of those things up there. And until we can understand better what the impact is, I'm not going to support this. I absolutely am happy to support a general statement of support for complying with the constitutional requirement, for charter school reform, other educational issues, things like that.
The impact would be $1.8 million coming to Hempfield next year to address the adequacy gap and all of the parts of it. I'm not sure
Well,
what.
It was
I think
my
we-
understanding that that money is going to be distributed whether we do a resolution or not. Am I
No,
correct
that
in
money
that?
Only
has
if
to
it
be
gets
voted
approved.
for. Yeah, that's,
What, if it's approved, I mean, we don't have the power to do that.
Right, but we have the power to hopefully encourage the approval
Yeah,
of
to
it, and that's what this is
And,
for.
and I'm not, I guess what I'm asking is, we have this resolution, what do we want to accomplish? What's the point of the resolution? Is it to bring generally up, or do we want to go into details? Would we rather have a resolution that all of us can support, or no resolution?
I
Or
think
a partially reported?
the resolution, I agree with Grant, is that it needs to be more general, and our legislature needs to get their act together and come up with a formula that they agree on. It's pretty simple, and they haven't been able to do that for the past 20 years.
okay, just looking at this, just looking at the numbers, 4 through 8 in there are general. I mean, the 1, 2, and 3 probably would be the most invested school facilities. That would be great if they started to, especially for us, if they started to do, well, they still do have PlanCon, but actually budget some money for it. Examine charter school funding, that would be great. Again, as Mr. Bomersky said, and I don't remember the numbers, but you pay PA Cyber 1 $20,000 to send a student there from Hempfield, where we do it in our program for the cost of what it normally costs to send a child through Hempfield. And, and the same with special ed costs, that's even more and with that. So they're general, investing in our education workforce. Supposedly there is going to be, or there is a teacher shortage. So I guess what I'm saying is the biggest, does everyone agree that the people that are opposed to this look at 1, 2, and 3 as the
Tab and Doug, do you know how the legislature figures out how much each school gets each year?
That's a very complex formula.
But it's not just a formula, the legislators get together, right? And
Yeah,
figure-
there's some, I could get you some more information on that in board news, and I'll also find out what the vote is needed for the resolution, just so you're clear for,
Okay.
for next
My
resolution.
understanding of that, and if you find something different. It's like any other official action.
That's what I
I think it simply
Right.
requires a
That's-
majority of those present and voting.
that's
as
my
of at least
that's my
5.
understanding as well. I just
Yeah.
wanted to confirm.
You need at least 5 to
Unanimous.
pass it.
You need majority or unanimous?
He's gonna.
Regular
Sorry, I misspoke. You
regular-
would need 5 people.
regular
Five
approval.
people.
Yeah.
But then, for example, if this were to pass, hypothetically, there's a spot for 9 board members to sign there.
Right. We
I'm
don't-
assuming you
don't
would
to
not
sign
have
it
all
if you
your
don't want to.
signatures.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
I personally think if we're going to have a resolution, it needs to be something that all 9 of us can agree to. Otherwise, it weakens the whole concept of that, how we arrive at that arrangement, that agreement, their different choices. Mike put this together. I guess if you have suggestions for him, to go back to him. Do we have a deadline by a date where we should
It would be, I mean,
get that
who
to
knows,
the?
who knows what the legislators.
Well, I mean,
they
hopefully
could-
they're busy on the budget, you
Yeah.
know,
It's
but,
meant to, it's meant to encourage their action before passing the budget, so soon this month.
Well, I assume, but
I think they
I'm
go
trying
into
to
session
pin
like in
things
June.
down. If we
June,
want
yeah,
something
prior to
done, is there a
June.
time when we need to get it done by?
Okay, and Mrs. Johnson, this is what I would suggest, and it's something that I would be comfortable with. Now, Mr. Maris, I don't know if we would have time for you to take this to our colleagues of the other districts.
It was just an idea.
Okay.
That may be something down
I
the road.
would strike 1, 2, and 3 and make a new number 1 that simply says, we urge the General Assembly to fulfill its constitutional mandate to provide a fair and, take the language in the Constitution,
Whatever,
a
yeah.
fair and robust form of public education. And then I'm fine with 4 through 8, renumbering them appropriately.
I think that's already stated in the first paragraph. It's actually in quotations. Provide for the maintenance and support of a thorough and efficient system of public education to serve the needed of the Commonwealth.
Thorough and
Right from the
efficient,
right from the Constitution.
Yeah. Well, then, you're right, then we just have to just go
Make that number.
strike 1 through 3 and renumber 4 through 8 appropriately.
Can you just, I just don't quite understand, what is it about number 1 that is
Or 2 or
uncomfortable? I just kind of want to understand the level of discomfort with number 1, because I don't understand that.
Sure, because I don't understand the long-term ramifications of that. I think that the long-term ramifications are that we get a little bit more money over the next 7 years, and then the farther out we go from now, we get less and less new money as the new formula starts to take primacy over the old formula. I think that's what happened, but I'm not certain about that.
And if you, I would need to clarify that too.
Okay,
I
and I think
understand.
this
I
is-
think the
yeah.
first 7 years is
Yeah.
is a great deal. But we need to understand past that. And if we can get a better explanation of what happens year 8, now that's part of why we have to reconstitute the BEFC in 2029 to figure it
Yeah.
out going forward. But-
Why, help me understand, I think we all want the same thing.
We all want
Why
more
is
money.
it so
Right.
important to have 1, 2, and 3 in there when none of us really know with certainty what 1, 2, and 3 mean?
Would it be okay to just include reducing the volatility, that portion of it? Because I think we would all appreciate less volatility
Was
in
this
the.
based on the recommendation of the minority
No.
assembly?
I
It
think
was both.
What, those numbers, where'd they come from?
the part where it says provide at least 200 million on down, I think both sides, the majority and the minority report, agree with number 1 up to the provide at least, and then the provide at least 200 million is the majority,
It was in this chart.
um, is the majority report.
And was it that the minority report did not specify?
They did not specify.
They just did not specify.
They don't, they don't say anything, if I remember correctly from looking and from what Mr. Boberski said when it came out, they don't specify anything. I think they agree, both sides agreed with using the bet to develop a sort of an equal thing to do that. I think they calculate adequacy targets. That one I'm not sure of, but number 3, I think that was part of both reports.
From what
And-
from what I understood, everything that's in 1 to 8 is in both
Is what?
reports.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
From what I understand, 1 through 8 is in both the minority and the majority reports.
Thank you.
And that's what they were pulling from to make it.
Okay.
I don't have any more to say on this, except I agree with you, Mr. Keener. I think because we don't deeply understand the impact of this, for that reason, I support your suggested changes.
Well, is there support of a majority of us here to ask the superintendent to redraft this in light of what we've been discussing? He can send it out in board news, and then if people, without objection, it can be placed on the agenda at next Tuesday's meeting. Does that seem like a reasonable path forward?
I'm not opposed to asking him to redraft it. I'm not saying that I would 100% be ready to, I would like to find one of them that something we can all agree on.
Sure.
Would be the goal.
Okay.
And I don't think, I wouldn't want to throw this one out yet, but I wouldn't mind seeing new wording to
ask him to redraft it, and as long as they're both presented in public, we could vote on either of them.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yep, so
Yeah, as long
that's
as
the direction of the board?
And in the
Yeah,
meantime,
well,
we'll
yeah,
try to
and
gather
I
some of
guess-
those answers.
Before we
understand
decide, Pat arrived late. Do you have anything to add?
No, and sorry that was a little bit late, finished up a work meeting. No, I mean, what Mr. Donato just tossed out sounds good to me. It makes sense.
And basically, the redraft would be, if I understand Mr. Keener right, is keep everything and just renumber 4 through 8 as 1 through, I can't even count that high, 1 through 5.
Yeah,
It's good I can do math.
there's not going to be a substantial turnaround timeline here for us.
Right.
Yeah, so that would be the draft.
Are you looking for 1 through 3 to be completely removed or to be made more vague?
I guess I go back to what Justin said earlier. I just struggle, this proposal and idea, is this the best thing for Hempfield? Is this the best thing for Pennsylvania? I don't know, and so we're advocating for something that we don't totally understand as board members. I think that's what you were saying, Justin?
I think we've had plenty of time to understand it, and there's been
Not that we-
presentations.
It's not that we don't understand it, there's too many unknowns related to it, and I think that financial impact long-term is the unknown.
I think if we can garner, $9.4 million over the next 7 years that we would not otherwise have, and then it will be revisited.
Well, what if it's more than 9.4 million? What if there's options out there that we don't know about that could give us more than that amount of money? So
Well, I'm not waiting for that when 9 million's on the table. I'm gonna go for that. I'm not gonna wait for something else. Like,
Yeah, we're not going to
We're not gonna get that.
We're
See
not
more
going to
than
see the
$9.4
$9 million. That would be nice, but I don't think.
Why not advocate for it if
Yeah,
it's
I
being
mean-
offered?
Here would be we bring it back, we'll ask Mr. Roberski to get rid of 1, 2, and 3 and just move those up and renumber. And maybe Mr. Roberski, because I don't want to create more work for him
Absolutely.
because this is an extremely busy time for him, but maybe he could come back and I'll ask him we'll bring them both back, ask him if he can explain better 1, 2, and 3, and maybe he can answer everybody's. Would that be fair?
I think that's fair, but I would just add this comment, because I feel like it needs to be said. I think we've all agreed that this probably isn't going to do a whole lot except give a platform to the community. So I'm not sure why it really matters if we create a document that everyone can support. I think we're splitting hairs here, and I guess you could say that about my position on this, but if you want a full support of the board, then let's get it to a place where it's generic enough that we can all agree to it and that we can put it out for the public, and let's move forward. If the barrier is the specificity in here, it is not going to make any difference, and again, I'm going to sound harsh, whether we have the specific 9 million in here or we don't. We're not going to get it because we have it here, and we're not going to get it because we don't. So why are we so hung up on getting rid of the first 3 on here? I have no idea.
So we'll throw it in board news tomorrow.
Thank you. Okay.
And if he can, if not,
We can. I know.
will tell him when he calls me up to talk to you.
Well, my boss is sitting right over there in the corner, so we'll get it done.
So and you have to take him to lunch,
Yeah.
so I can't pass that up with the.
And again, to encourage the board members and members of the public to go and actually speak in person. I did get an email from Senator Ahmet that he's having something, I already forgot what the date was because I couldn't go. So they have meetings that you can go and attend, or you can call them up, and I've always found them, even prior to being on the board, I got calls back.
Yeah.
And
The only other advantage, whether we pass anything I could see, is if PSBA, because they do lobby for funding and, and, you know, again, to say that there's 500 school districts, just to say that, 497 of them passed resolutions that would be at least helpful for them. Again, it's going to really change anything, I'm not sure, but it would be helpful, I think, for them.
It is some pressure, if you will, from their constituents,
Yeah.
and because they do listen to that.
Thank you for
For
having
sure.
the discussion for everyone.
Anyone have anything else to say about this at this time? So we'll revisit it. We'll get something in our emails and we'll revisit it then at the next meeting, whatever meeting that is. Okay, moving on, if there's nothing else. Last call. Okay, thank you. All right, pathways to graduation.
Mrs. Johnson, I apologize if you already said this. We have 0 public comments this evening, correct?
Oh, I forgot to mention that. I did know that, but I did not share that, so. Okay. Thank you for the reminder.
All right, Mr. Snitzer and I are just here to give you a quick update on Pathways to Graduation. Last year, actually I've been here for the last couple years before it went into place, and then last year we gave you an update. You can go ahead to the next slide there, Mr. Graham. So this is just review. This went into effect, Pathways to Graduation, with the class of 2023, so this is our second year through the process. Everything that's required by PDE with the Pathways to Graduation is in addition to our requirements, Hempfield's requirements of 28 credits for graduation, and also PDE already had in effect the career portfolio requirements. So those didn't change with the addition of Pathways to Graduation.
Just out of curiosity, what do they do for their career portfolio? I know now they're supposed to be starting working on it in elementary school all the way out, but what
Right, there's a certain list of artifacts that they gather throughout the entire time.
It's like a checklist that you. Okay.
Exactly, and then we use our career software. It's currently called Zello. Did we just vote to change that?
To school
Right.
I remember having.
Exactly, so that's the place that we store it all,
Store it all.
and our counselors in the high school are on top of making sure that everything's in there that needs to be in there. All right, so again, this is just review, but there are 5 pathways to graduation. The first one is the most simple. This is all on the website. It's all, again, things that I've shared in the past, but just wanted to make sure you understood the basics going into this. The first pathway is Keystone Proficiency, which just means the student is proficient on all 3 keystones. The second pathway is a composite score number, so it allows a student to be basic, but not below basic in one area and do really well in another area, and the 3 scores combined hit a minimum score, and that allows the student to also meet a pathway to graduation. That's a great pathway for a kid who misses proficient by a question in one area and is doing well in other areas, and we often see those kinds of scores that are so close but not quite there. So that's a nice alternative in that case. Pathway 3 is for our students who are at CTC, and they have to, we check their grades in January at the end of the first semester to make sure that they're on track for showing likelihood of success in their career. The fourth pathway also involves test scores. However, this is a great pathway for students who might have moved in from another state, for instance, and so they weren't here to take Keystones, and we need to document their proficiency in another way, and so that might be documented with PSAT scores or SAT scores. It also allows for the minimum score on the ASVAB, which is the military test, and we give that 2 times a year at Hempfield as well. So it does give a few different alternatives, but still is primarily test score based. Then when we get into the 5th pathway, this is where it starts to get complicated, because this is the evidence-based pathway where students have to provide, demonstrate that they have completed in each of these categories 1 piece from the top category, 2 from the bottom category. And this starts to get complicated, and this is where our guidance counselors spend an enormous amount of time with a small number of students to try to gather this evidence in order to make it to show that they have demonstrated proficiency. So now I think the next slide shows us last year's numbers, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Sisser to talk about this.
Just one quick question. I probably asked this before, and I'll try to remember it for next year when you're doing this. They take Algebra 1 in middle school, that counts as the keystone.
Correct.
And second thing, with the 28 credits, you're saying the state requires this. Do they still require, like you have 9th, 10th grade, I'll use English?
Right. The state has their own minimum. So, for instance, 4 years of English and right hits the.
In addition to those pathways, they still have to get.
Correct.
We add more, but they have to get the minimum.
Correct.
Credits to do it.
That's accurate.
I'll try not to ask the algebra question.
Okay.
So looking at the class of 23, pathways 1 and 2 were our highest and most utilized ways to be able to meet the pathways to graduation. And that you'll find that is the trend for 24 as well. CTC students with the 38 students and 64 students for alternative assessment. And for the class of 23 and for the class of 24, we provided assessments for juniors especially to be able to support them with the PSAT and the ASVAB. We increased those numbers last year with the attempt to be able to meet this pathway. So it was an extra step that we took to be able to provide it. This year, we still provided it to quite a few students, but it wasn't, we pretty much made almost every junior take and senior that had not met a pathway, we had them take the ASVAB or the PSAT. So we modified that a little bit this year. And then Pathway 5, evidence-based, was only utilized by 13 students. It was a lot less chasing. We were able to do that, and there was some leeway that was available as it was the first year. We had 24 students graduate on IEP goals, and 3 were given waivers for the pathways to graduation, and 3 students did have to repeat 12th grade.
This year.
Sorry, with this?
This was 23.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Thank you.
So I'm sorry, just to make sure I understood you. So 6% of the students did not graduate for failure to achieve one of the 5 pathways.
No, 3
But if I
students.
add, that only adds up to 94%.
Right, but we are, in addition to the pathways, students can graduate based on their IEP goals.
Yes.
So another 24 students graduated based on their IEP goals, and 3 were granted waivers from the superintendent. There are specific guidelines on what allows the superintendent to grant a waiver.
Okay, so once we count, how many people ultimately did not graduate because of failure to achieve a pathway, failure to give a waiver, or failure to meet their IEP goal?
None. All of them, all students met the pathway or received a waiver or graduated in IEP goals.
Okay.
So pathways did not impede any student from graduating in 2023.
And is that how are we looking for 2024?
That's
That is
coming
actually
up.
coming right up next.
Okay.
With the alternative pathways, so a child, I'll start like that. A child's in high school, they take the Keystone Algebra exam, they have a bad day, and don't score well, but they take the SATs and they do the math, and, you know, I don't know anymore what the grade scores are, but they get a great score, so that would replace.
Correct,
Yes.
correct.
I would hope. Okay.
Yep, and I think, you know, we had such weird years coming up to this with Keystones and because of COVID and kids not taking more than normal. So I think that the Pathway 4 was used more because of that. So, you know, they might have missed a Keystone one year and then they didn't retake it, and so.
And
we
up
ended
until
with
their
that.
senior year, they are allowed to do the Keystones again if they were a bubble student. So there would be opportunities for them to do it. In the senior year, it's a lot more difficult to be able to do the Keystones because we don't get the scores back in time for graduation to be able to do that evaluation.
I just wanted to ask you one question. I did think I heard you say 2 students needed to repeat 12th grade. Did I miss?
3 students need to
Three.
read, yes.
Okay, so there were 3 that did not graduate?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
But that was not due to pathways, that was due to not completing coursework or other such
Okay.
things.
Thank you.
So looking at the progression, and I do want to say, like, this is looking at this year's progression. We actually worked very hard in their junior year to be able to start filling in this process. Especially students with IEPs, their caseworkers are working ahead of time to be able to support the students. We are also able to use certain CTC programs from their junior year to be able to connect with this. But before I go further with this progression, I do want to say Carol Dommel was critical in being able to update and keep our information. It's accounting for 555 students is a very difficult process to be able to do and to be able to go through all the different points of data. Also, Dr. DaCosta and Mrs. Romero, the school counselors, were paramount in making sure that much of this was up to date and considering and finding things. And even students who we might not have had a transfer of records, they were tracking down things to be able to make sure that we were able to meet the evidence or any of the pathways that were granted. But then going through what we have with the progressions, we did communicate home with families. That was part of our summer letter as well as our senior letter to be able to take place. We included making sure that students and their families were aware of pathways. Counselors met individually with all the students to be able to go through their progress, to be able to ensure that they were meeting
They
their
met with
needs.
every junior?
Every senior and every junior. Actually, our counselors meet with the students
I know
every
they meet
student.
regularly, but for this specific purpose?
Yes, it is part of their yearly meeting. So.
Like, how many kids are in the junior, well, you already said.
About
never mind.
550 in a
That was
class
like
as an
a
average.
redundant
Yep.
question, I'm sorry.
2 counselors per class. So
So-
that
Right,
gives you
right.
an idea of how many
Roughly
students
about
they're meeting with.
270s per counselor. CTC grades, industrial credentials, college admissions, all of those are continually reviewed throughout the year. We also make sure that the ASVAB administration and PSATs and SATs are collected continually throughout the year. And then we get to that evidence-based at the end. We start looking at the career safe industry credential. That is new to this year. We actually have students earning what's called the OSHA 10 credential. We coordinate with a company called Career Safe, and the students, take a course on safety within the workplace. And at the end, it's a legitimate credential. They receive a certificate. They also receive a card that they can take to any workplace or be able to put on their resume as something that they've accomplished as part of their evidence. We have done CPR certifications as part of this process, and the counselors also organize a service learning project here at school, but students are able to participate in service learning outside in, like, for their church or another organization.
So those additional things basically give students that maybe are struggling to meet the requirements additional credits to graduate.
Yes.
And honestly, as frustrating as sometimes things coming down from PDE are to us, the concept of the industry credentials is something that is really positive for our students. And so if we're able to have them leave here, they may not be going to another educational facility at all, but they leave here with some kind of credential. That's a really positive outcome of these pathways.
I guess the only thing I'd say there is it'd be great if other students had the opportunity to take CPR and be CPR certified too.
Hang on to that
Yes.
thought.
Yes.
Okay.
So for the OSHA, is that, it's just that part of the evidence, or is it also something that kids can get when they're in some of the other courses that also we go back to, because OSHA is going into workplaces, construction sites, all sorts of places of business to check, so,
Right, so right now,
or
because
is
one
it
of,
just for these kids?
Right,
Or
so-
it goes,
unfortunately, one of the things that PDE did not include with this mandate was funding. So the Career Safe costs money. What is it?
$32.
$32 a student, which we funded for these students.
to take the course?
Correct.
Now, that was actually not the price that the community has to pay. If you were to go and sign up for Career Safe, it's actually $58. So because we are a K-12 organization, they do give us a discount to be able to participate.
So, and a couple of the slides at the end of the presentation will show you different ways that we're working to implement industry certifications into other courses as well. But for these career safe, these were just for our students who we were trying to find alternate pathways that they could come up with a industry credential. And they could choose, the goal behind it is that they're choosing a industry credential that directly relates to something that they really are going to do. So if they're thinking that they might become a nurse's aide, it makes more sense for them to do the CPR certification. But if it's something that they are looking at working in more of an industrial place, it makes sense for them to take the OSHA. So we offer both of those options.
Another piece behind the credentials that I found very interesting with working with this year's senior class was they had credentials, but they didn't realize they had credentials. So they would sit down with the counselor, they'd have conversations, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, I had that when I got this part-time job here, or I worked at a summer camp and I had this. And they went through, and some of them actually expanded their own career portfolios caused by having to do that exploration. And we had students, I was included in a lot of these emails where they take a picture of it so they'd be able to use it for their evidence and be able to send it to Carol to be able to update. So they did a further exploration into their own career that many of them have started, you know, as freshmen and sophomores that they didn't know they had.
So it was just a matter of reporting. Yeah. Yeah.
So we can move to 24. So the class of 2024, right now, this was when our last reporting. We are currently at 225 students did Pathway 1 and 180 did Pathway 2. CTE, if you notice from 23 to 24, there is a jump of about 20 students. That's because we were able to include some of the junior CTC credentials that they had earned, and so that number was a little bit larger with our alternative assessment. A lot of them was from our junior PSAT and our ASVAB test that we were able to take. And a lot of students who had never planned on taking the ASVAB didn't realize their aptitudes in those situations, so they're actually exploring that option because we sort of said, let's take both or take one, and they made those choices. So I thought it was very interesting. 14 students have completed evidence-based. At the time of when this was done, 9 students had not completed their pathway, either through having a IEP goals or through a waiver. Of those 9 students, we're down to 4, and they all have one piece of evidence they still have to produce. And those students, I actually spoke to 3 of the 4 students today, and they are in the midst of being able to complete that. They have to have it done by Monday, for lack of a better phrase, because we need to be able to get all of that put together. So with only 4 students not being able to meet the pathway, and again, all the credit goes heavily to our counselors and the efforts that they have put forth in Carol for the documentation. We've been chasing, we've been making calls. I've spoken to parents at every IEP meeting. We have a conversation about this, not just for the meeting of it, but some of the students have expanded. And to show some anecdotal evidence, I'm sorry to go a little bit further, but we had a student who walked in and he had tears in his eyes because he never thought he could go to college, and he decided to apply, and he will be going to Central Penn College next year, and he didn't think he was going to do it. His plan was, you know, he didn't think he would have the capacity to be able to do that, and because the teacher's like, hey, this has a program you're interested in, apply for it, and he did that. So, and that helped him to be able to meet his pathway, but that pathway pushed that exploration that I think he might not have done before. And to see his eyes in those situations, it was well worth it.
So those are last week's numbers, and as Mr. Snitzer said, I think we're adding approximately another 5 or 6 to that evidence-based pathway already. But that's as close as we could get by the time Dr. Dandridge needed this. So, all right. So where do we go from here? After we have these final numbers for graduation, these have to be reported to the state, and that's where Carol Dummel works a lot of her magic behind the scenes with her spreadsheets, and then it gets entered. We're working on adding more industry credentials, which I'll talk about on the next slide, and then we start this process all over again. So the other 2 counselors that are going to be moving into the senior class will start this again. We'll look this summer at who has not met after we get Keystone scores back, and we have all the retesting data, and we have all that. We'll look at the data again, who hasn't met the first 2 pathways based on the numbers that we have, and then we'll start this process all over again. So the next 2 slides just show where I've been.
Mrs. Dyson.
Okay.
Just a thought about the industry credentials. I think one of you said that you currently offer ServSafe.
ServSafe is on a prospective list
Okay,
coming up.
and is RAMP on the list as well?
That is not one that we've talked about.
RAMP is like the front of the house version of it, responsible alcohol service, responsible alcohol management, and people can serve once they turn 18. So they'd be graduating, they would be eligible to be servers, bartenders, things like that. I wonder if we could even bundle those two and do, like offer, I mean, the hospitality industry obviously needs good workers, and in a Saturday class, you could bundle the two and do ServSafe in the morning, RAMP in the afternoon. Then one day they can come out with 2 credentials that obviously help here and also make them pretty attractive as entry-level candidates because they're qualified to work front of the house and back of the house.
Well, we're looking at a lot of different areas of how they could embed right into the classes and not just be the standalone career
Okay,
safe.
even better,
So,
yeah.
so that food safe is one that we have looked at in
Yeah.
our FCS classes, for example. So that's what the next 2 pages show is. One of my goals has been working on how do we make post-secondary connections for all of our students. So this chart and into the next one, and I think it was given to you as a 1-page handout altogether, but I could only make it so big, started talking about, okay, we have a lot of kids that are going into colleges, and so we have all of the connections that can be made for them through our AP classes, and now through our increased number of college and the high school classes that offer those opportunities for them right in our schools. And then we're starting to add more industry credentials where we can. So this just shows the first couple departments on there, and you'll see in red is that we're looking at adding CPR to our human biology for the allied health sciences, so that again, every student who would go through that would have the opportunity to get CPR certified. And then if you go on to the next slide, it shows some of the other areas. This year, for the first time, we're offering Microsoft Office industry credentials in our Microsoft classes, so that they can take PowerPoint, Word, Excel, and Access tests. And some kids are taking multiple of those. So this is the first time that we've ever done that, and we're doing that currently this year. Next year, we're looking at adding Red Cross babysitting into our preschool classes. That's been a process for our teachers because our teachers, in order to offer that, first had to go through the CPR certification and get that certification, and then they had to do the Red Cross babysitting and then the instructor certification. So our teachers are going through many layers of trainings in order to be able to be trainers themselves so that we can put these into our classes. So that's one that's taken time to get through, but we're looking at that one for next year. I've talked to you about the sports officiating class, which will not have a specific credential at the end, but will set students up to know exactly what they need to do to become sports officials. I actually just met with Mr. Narkowitz today, who will be teaching that class, and we started working through some of that curriculum. In addition, in our technology and engineering department, we're going to be including a hand tools identification and safety certification, as well as a multimeter certification. Both of those we anticipated being able to begin offering the current school year, but the company through which we ordered the materials was not able to deliver them until like the end of November. We thought they were ordered in July, but it took months for it to come in. And then again, once the things come in, our teachers have to go through the training in order to be certified to be trainers. So we should have that in place for next school year. Additionally, for CTC, we've added a dual enrollment opportunity in automotive technology, which I know we have one student specifically enrolled in that for next year. I don't know if there'll be more than that. And then in the next column are some of the things that we've been looking ahead to as well. We have a sports medicine class in the health and physical education department that we're not offering this next year, that if we can put CPR in that class, we will do that as well. And then again, once the FCS department has taken care of the babysitting course, then they're going to be looking at the food safe options as well. So we're gradually looking at places where we can do them. They do take time because our teachers need to be certified themselves in order to offer these.
I love the forward thinking and the planning ahead and being proactive and looking ahead once you're already working on one. I think it'll hit so many, like, I'd love to see that all filled with all the areas and how cool that would be.
I'm trying to make sure that there are things in every department that make those kind of connections for our students.
I have a question. When I was going through this prior to the meeting, I recall several years ago, we talked about accounting classes, and there was a possibility of AP. When I went to the AP site, I didn't see that there's an AP accounting.
Right,
Okay,
so this
so-
next year, we're offering 3 new college and the high school classes in the business department. So again, we have to do things, baby steps. But that's one that they have explored, looking at certification. We have one of our business teachers is a certified public accountant and is qualified to teach the classes that HAC offers. But we also have some connections with Messiah, so we've been working with them. So it's something that could happen, but we're not
So
there
it
yet.
will be connected
We
to
all-
HAC or maybe Pitt.
No,
where-
I don't think
wherever-
Pitt has a program.
okay.
Right now, it
Uh-huh.
would be HAC or Messiah would be the ones that we'd be looking at for the accounting classes. But again, we just have to do things in stages because we currently have an accounting 1 and an accounting 2 class. And each time we're adding these, we're trying to make sure that we're not adding new courses, but we're changing what we're doing so that we can staff these things. So for
Sure.
instance, our CHS argument class that's part of the ELA is actually part of our AP language class. It's the same class, so it's not an additional class. It's just giving kids different opportunities. Or our new business calculus class is replacing our old college prep calculus class, but now they have the opportunity to earn college credits for it. So that's why we have to do it in stages.
So will these kids that take these courses, they'll obviously be well prepared for college level?
Absolutely.
Are they going to be well prepared to, like, go and work, say, at one of our local businesses that has I don't know what a proper name, but the accounting or the bookkeeping department? I mean, is that part of the thinking with what's being offered?
Right, so I mean, we're looking in, again, in both directions for students who are going to be going on to colleges or other trainings, and then also for students who might not. So certainly the Microsoft Office certifications are important
And that's gonna be
certifications.
for everybody? Okay,
So we try to balance both of those when we're looking at these options.
thank you.
Mr. Snitzer, related to this discussion, is this where it ties in, and the rest of this board's probably not going to understand this question, but that's okay, to your potential upcoming meeting with Mr. Geib? Is this the
Mr. Who?
Geib?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
I
Is
had to think.
this
So
where
would
that
not-
fits into this?
I would not see that being a piece to be
Okay.
able to connect into it. Mr. Guide would be
Okay.
more of just doing a mentoring program to
Okay.
be able to support a small group of students who were selected.
Okay.
I really wanted to bring him in earlier this year,
Yeah.
but when looking at it, it was just not an option. With the end, like looking at so we have the problem with the situation with seniors is they're really only in period 1, period 2, and sometimes period 3, and with the students that I wanted to have him mentor that would have, I think, benefit from his mentoring, I was trying to get them to pass their classes, so I couldn't pull them out of anything. But I think in the future, we'll be able to devise a way to be able to utilize, lunch meetings, building those relationships, and spreading it out throughout the school day.
Yeah, that helps me understand. I wasn't sure if that was embedded into this,
No.
the potential concept, or if that was going to be a sidebar
I
to
could
this.
definitely
that I
see
better
him being an
understand.
asset as we move forward,
Yeah.
especially with his connections with Thaddeus Stevens.
Yeah.
But we're still in the midst of exploring that. I actually have it scheduled to call him on June 2nd, so.
Yeah, I
that's
talked
when-
to him last night, if I asked, but when you brought this up, I immediately thought, I wonder if this is all connected, and I didn't know.
I have a
Okay.
feeling he'll be able to give some suggestions in that way for us, especially, his vast career knowledge, I think, would be very helpful.
Okay, thank you.
With the mention of Thaddeus Stevens, did we have a discussion at some point to perhaps also have classes available for I started to say our children like I'm a mom.
We have
For our students.
Right, we have a dual enrollment agreement already with Thaddeus Stevens, so our
Okay.
students can take classes there.
I just didn't see it listed
I didn't
on
list
our
every dual
charts.
enrollment agreement that we have.
So we just have to, some of us, get fuzzy about the past, so thank you for that. I really appreciate what you're doing for our kids. I can remember when we first moved here, it was just college, 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 and I like how we've embraced through a process of not every student wants to or needs to or should go to college. There's so many other different options. So I really appreciate the work you're doing to expand those opportunities for our students.
Thank you.
Yeah, the team's done a really great job with this. I know when this requirement first came down, as I'm sitting in different meetings with my peers, they're all like, "Oh, you got like 40 kids. What are you doing, Howard?" And I'm just like, "Oh, we're managing." The team embraced this, and they've just done a really nice job. And it's not just meeting the requirement; it's actually having meaningful ways of meeting the requirement, which is what I probably am the most proud of. So, they've done a great job with this. They really have.
Yeah, I think that word meaningful is, I'm so excited by some of these, and all of them, but some of them are just jumping off the page. Like you said, the Serve Safe popped into my mind right away, and then we scrolled down to see that, because we did teach, when I was teaching those courses, we had a lot of that in there, but to have that final certification is great. But I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more on the seal of biliteracy with the ELD as well as your world languages, and what that looks like from both sides.
Great. So Pennsylvania just began this program a couple years ago, and Hempfield just got approved to offer it last year for the first time. And this allows students who are native English speakers to take assessments that show that they are biliterate in other languages. And one of the ways that they can meet that is through the AP testing. And so if they score a 4 or 5 on AP testing, they're able to be eligible for the seal of biliteracy. But then it works the opposite way as well, so that we have students whose native language is something other than English, and then they must show proficiency in their native language and as well as in English. And to show the proficiency in English, anyone can do that through the Keystone exams. That's how we show English in either way. But to show their in their native languages, they take another exam called the Avant Stamp exam, and that's available in many, many different languages. And so we just started offering that last year for the first time. This year, in our last administration, I think we had about 30 students or so taking that. Now, some of those were on each side of the proficiency, because a group of our students who are taking German right now decided they wanted to take that as a kind of prep for the AP test, so they did both. And some of the students we were doing all kinds of languages. We did find that there are some languages that we have trouble finding tests that are approved by the state for the seal of biliteracy. So then Svetlana, our ELD coordinator, and I also worked on creating portfolio requirements, which are allowed by the state as well, and we created that, which also then means that we need to have assessors in the native languages to do those, so we started working on that as well. We did not have any students take us up on the portfolio requirements. They do have to show proficiency in reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So all 4 of those are tested on the Avant Stamp test, and also on the, if they would be doing the portfolio, we have elements of all 4 of those in the portfolio.
That's fantastic, thanks.
Anyone else? Thank you very much. We appreciate all your hard work and
Thank you.
taking care of our students for us. That concludes our part of tonight's meetings. Turn it over to Mr. Keener.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. Let's take about a 5-minute recess. We'll reconvene at 6:10 by that clock for policy, personnel, and legal. Policy, Personnel, and Legal Committee. Unless anyone objects, I'm going to ask that we do the discussion, 5A, B, and C first, so that Ms. Choi can participate in the discussion. She needs to depart by 6:30. Does anyone object if we move those around? Okay. So, at the board's request, the administration reviewed policy 227, 222, and 227.2, which are controlled substance, tobacco, and extracurricular policies, to sort of determine how to incorporate vaping prohibitions into those policies. The student council was involved in those discussions, and Dr. Musser, my understanding is, and Dr. Brossman, that what you're going to do is the two of you and Ms. Choi are going to present in a general way the framework for the policies, and then we'll bring back specific language for first reading and second reading during meetings this summer, with the hope of having something in place by the start of the 24-25 academic year.
That is correct.
All right, well, Dr. Musser, would you like to?
So, as Mr. Keener said, there were two issues really that the district was looking to address in some of these vaping policies. Our first concern was making sure we're addressing the vaping that we're starting to see. And then the other piece was making sure our policies were meeting the needs of the district. We had some issues with our current student use possession of controlled substance and its conflict with our other vaping policy. So trying to clean up our policies without adding any new policies. The only adjustment we made to 227, if you scroll down, is we put a vaping, it should be highlighted, we put a vaping definition in there. Right there. And basically what we said is, this is the definition of vaping. We are not addressing this in the substance control policy at all. So it cleans up that confusion of where it was sometimes in this policy, sometimes in that policy. So we pushed all vaping to our actual vaping policy. So now we're not into that conflict of anymore of how much was in this vape, how much was in that vape, what was in this, what's in that. We're just going to treat all vapes as a vape and then work through a progressive discipline structure. So this minor change, along with, we made some adjustments to make sure that stimulants like coffee and tea, which if you read the actual verbiage of some of the language here, was actually prohibited by our policy. Students are allowed to drink coffee and tea and the energy drinks in occasion. I don't know what your mom says. My mom's not a fan of them, but yeah, they're okay to drink according to this policy. So all we did here was basically say, vaping, not covered under here, go to our tobacco vaping policy. That's the only change in 227. And again, we're not asking for votes or anything tonight, but just to try to explain the process that we use to remedy this situation. So that's really the only changes in 227.
So if somebody's vaping and they have a controlled substance, is that covered here?
It all will go, if it's a vape, it'll all go into the vaping policy. All controlled substance, your typical marijuana or some of the other things that are in leaf form will all still be controlled under the controlled substance policy.
When we were scrolling on the screen there, I don't see it on mine, but as you were scrolling, it looked like there was a strike through on...
Liquor?
Yeah.
It was alcohol and liquor, which we seem to think as we met with other people were redundant.
Okay.
It all has alcohol in it.
You say liquor, I think bourbon. You say alcohol, I think beer.
Terminology-wise, yes, but substance inside, same.
All bourbon is alcohol, not all alcohol is bourbon.
There you go. Logic.
So that's 227. Again, well, this is great conversation and very helpful. That's 227. We basically just made it very clear. If a student has a vaping violation, now we know, and administration knows what policy they're going to address that vaping policies or that vaping infraction. So with that said, Mr. Graham, if you can flip to 222. So here we made a couple of changes. At the time of the initial policy too, there was a lot of pushes towards, if you remember the manufacturer Juul. So like the state had that referenced in a lot of their language. We kind of took out some of that language. We subbed everything out with electronic cigarettes, so we have all those things covered. We used the state definition, so we were capturing all the vaping pieces. But really, a lot of this, the material that we needed was already in this policy, where I charged Dr. Brossman to work with student council and his staff is what happens on the vaping infractions. So we have clear vaping infractions and direction moving forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Brossman.
Sure. Mr. Graham, if you want to scroll down to just above guidelines. Right there. That's a good spot. Yeah, just above guidelines. Is this our most, that doesn't seem to be the one we worked on. Well, safe schools, law enforcement incident report. Okay, well, I'll share with you verbally. I'm not sure why that's not in there, but, oh no, I'm sorry. Yeah, a little further down, under guidelines.
I think you're down further.
Yep. Yeah, sorry, under guide, I was looking above. Okay, so right there, under guidelines. So, we added some pieces here under tampering with the device. So we added pieces that talk about, you know, if a student fails to cooperate with our investigation, which is something across the county, talking to the principals, we've run into more and more. You know, you're looking for something and someone just flat out refuses to participate in the investigation. And so that would be addressed basically, you know, if you refuse to participate in the investigation, then the student would be subject to the discipline for the infraction of which basically we were investigating. So kind of like, you know, if you refuse the breathalyzer test in a DUI, it's kind of like an admission of guilt. So we wanted to put something in the policy that addresses, you know, when students don't comply, because they are required to comply per our other policies, talking about student code of conduct and search and seizures and those types of things. And then the other piece we put in also talks about a student who violates this policy will be subject to the discipline that's outlined below, and when determining the number of offenses, principals will include any policy violations from the current and previous semester. So we put a little look back in there to make sure that it includes not just the current semester, but the semester before for their infractions. So in other words, it's May now. If you had your first offense now in May, and then you came back and had another offense in September, that would be strike 2, because you have the one in September, and then you have the one the previous semester. So basically, you don't get a completely clean start each school year. You get a one semester look back on the policy. So then with regards to the offenses, with kind of feeling things out with student council and the board through various discussions, we're at a 3-strike kind of policy here, where the first offense is basically what we're doing now, up to a 3-day suspension. Students may complete a school sanctioned cessation program, and if they do that, then that reduces their suspension, or if they agree to do that, it reduces their suspension to a 1-day suspension. So that's what we're currently doing, having a lot of success getting the students into the cessation program at the high school. I presented to you previously what that cessation program involves. It's pretty comprehensive, and it doesn't cost the district anything at the moment. So that's good. So that's strike 1. Strike 2, if you're second time that you're caught with a policy violation, then you'd be looking at a 5-day out-of-school suspension, and we go to the citation with the magisterial district judge, a SAP referral. SAP is student assessment program. Student assistance program. SAP referral is something we offer to students. And if they haven't already done so, we still want to make that cessation program available to them for a reduced suspension. That's not too different from what we're doing right now also. The big change comes in the third offense. On the third offense, a student is subject up to and including a 10-day suspension, and then we have the recommendation for expulsion, additionally a citation.
The third offense
Dr.
says
Blossman, I
5
think there
days.
might be a typo here,
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
They look identical, the
Yeah.
2 and
yeah,
3.
I think there's a typo.
It's a track changes issue with the PDF here. I'm looking for the other copy. Talk about what we talked about though.
Okay, so what Mr. Graham's displaying is not correct, but what we've talked about with student council and what we came out of our meetings was, on the third offense is when we do the 10-day out-of-school suspension and the recommendation for expulsion. The citation is still in there, a SAP referral is still in there, and students who have not already done so, we can still make the cessation program available to them. If it's your third offense, it's not going to be taking time off your suspension or avoiding the expulsion piece. So we presented all this to student council last Friday. Ms. Troy's here. They reacted favorably to it, but I want to give her a chance to give the student perspective.
Thank you. So we were able to meet up with not only the old representatives from this year, but also the new elected grade level representatives for next year. So we had like a bigger group and more opinions and like more discussion. So we were able to meet during WIN for our club meeting, and Dr. Brossman came in and explained the policy to us, and we were able to ask questions, and he was able to answer them for us, and we thought it was, the policy was reasonable, and no one had any objections to the policy, so.
So, question, the content of the vape, if it's THC versus nicotine, does that make any difference?
It does not, and that was part of what we talked about in our previous meetings. We don't want to be having to test or prove. It cleans up a lot of those legal pieces. You can't, like, if it were to go to an expulsion, someone can't challenge, oh, it wasn't this, it wasn't that. It's just a policy violation, because any type of vape is a policy violation at that point.
So if a student's noticeably high, intoxicated, doesn't make any difference? I'm just asking the question.
Well, if a student's under the influence at school, that could still fall under our drug and alcohol policy.
Okay.
But in terms of if they have a device with those things in it, then that would be more this.
You guys don't want to be...
So you're correct, and that's an important distinction. Someone being under the influence at school, now there's a barrier of proof to that as well, but we work through those things.
That comes under a different policy.
I guess, would the way to summarize it be, if they have a vape, it doesn't matter what's in the vape. This applies. If they're under the influence, it doesn't matter how they got under the influence.
Okay.
That policy applies.
Makes sense.
That's an excellent synopsis. Yeah.
I'm just curious in the wording of these, when you go into the first, second, and third offense, and it says,
Just caught that.
I think Mr. Graham has the most updated language on the screen now.
okay. Can
There
you
was a typo in the old version.
No, I'm not worried about the day, I'm not referring to the number of days or any of that, but it talks about if the student is in possession of. Where is the new wording on that? Because it only says, what I am looking at just says smoking, tobacco usage, paraphernalia. It doesn't say vaping, and I wasn't sure if that covered it, or if it needed to be more specific. Would it be up higher, perhaps, in this new?
I think, I'm guessing she's looking
Right
at
there.
it
Tampering, no, maybe it's higher student who violates. A student who violates. I just clicked on I just clicked on the clean version that was in the attachments, the final version that was attached.
Is the clean one in Board Docs the right one? I can bring that up.
No, I can put that one. I can put that one back in. The one you have is the correct one.
But we don't have.
Right.
one.
I'll drop that into Board Docs now.
I'm not suggesting any changes to the 3 discipline layers. However, I remember some initial discussions with the student council and others that there was discussion around the suspension not really being effective. So I'm assuming you talked about that in your group and had more discussion about that. I think that primarily came from the student council, if I remember correctly, but don't quote me on that. That the suspension maybe was not really a punishment. I don't want to say that it's not, but for some of the students, it meant nothing. And so I'm assuming you worked through that discussion and you're comfortable with not having any, because the word expulsion was mentioned as part of some of those initial, conversations.
Ms. Choi, do you want to speak to that, or Dr. Bossman?
Well, so we do have expulsion in here now on strike 3.
That's on the blue
That's
one.
been added.
Yeah, sorry, I'm still looking at the wrong version.
And you're 100% correct,
Okay.
because before our vaping policy didn't really go there.
Yeah.
And now it goes somewhere, and that was based on feedback from the students, and we do think it'll be taken a little bit more seriously.
Yeah, I would agree. Thank you. I apologize for missing that.
It's okay.
I'm looking at this
Yeah.
version.
That's not on you, that's on us.
So if we have this ready by the beginning of the school year, kids will be made well aware of the changes.
Yep, and so will parents.
In terms of timing, and I think there were some preliminary conversations about this. Normally, if we would advance a policy to first reading, it would go to first reading at the next board meeting, which would be the June meeting, and then second reading after that. But I don't think we want to take this to first reading in June because there's some wordsmithing that still needs to be done, right? Or will you be ready to take it to first reading in June?
We can be ready. At the end of the
Okay.
day, it was just we got the wrong the wrong draft up here from the wording. But we
Okay.
can be ready. We wanted to make sure that this was in line with what the board's
Okay,
direction
then-
was, and we wanted to make sure the students, because they were an integral part of this, are comfortable with the direction. But as far as the disciplinary procedure, we ran some numbers on past discipline infractions to see what impact it would have. And it is currently a mild impact. It's not going to all of a sudden give a ton of expulsions, which we all talked about as a concern moving forward. But there is some teeth in it now where there would be an expulsion or two where people would know that vaping is taken serious. And like all policies, I would like to start something, obviously we'll start something for this year, but it would bear monitoring moving forward to make some of adjustments and some of these steps to make sure that we're continuing to be in step with what's occurring in the high school.
Okay.
Primarily the high school.
All
This
right.
would also impact, middle school and
Sure.
elementary as well. We're just not
Okay.
seeing those numbers.
And this may be where you were going. When do you need it done so you can have it printed in the student handbook?
Don't actually print student handbooks
Or
anymore.
have
Mr.
it-
Graham puts them
I
in
should
in
know
their
that.
iPads. So
When you need to have that updated?
we'll do that this summer, and I feel like we pushed that out in August,
So you need it done
before
by
school
August.
starts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I'm hearing is our goal, assuming that the board is willing, we should do first reading in June, second reading in July.
If the
So
board,
that then you have the rest of July and all of August to publicize this.
That would be fantastic.
Okay. Additional questions or comments about 222?
My only question is when you talked about the semester look back, because this is a change to the policy, will
We-
that apply?
It will not. Everyone gets a fresh start in September,
So
August.
This particular September,
Correct.
they get a fresh
Yep.
start. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I don't think that would be fair.
I just want to make sure.
All right. Then anything else with 222? All right, then we will move 222 as amended to first reading in June. All right.
Did you need to talk at all about 227.2?
yes, we're going to be talking about that one next.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now we'll do discussion on 227 and 227.2.
So the only changes we're looking for in 227 is vaping currently didn't impact our athletic programs like it would substance abuse violations. So if a student was caught drinking and participated in a sport, there's obviously steps that they move through. Vaping was one of those things that was never addressed in that policy at all. So vaping, while Every bit of as a concern was not addressed in any of our extracurricular activities or anything else of that nature. So we made sure to include that in this policy. The other major change I'd like to bring to your attention is the renumbering of this. So I'm looking to have this renumbered to 2271. The reason is we have a 2272 without having a 1. I know what the 1 was before. That used to be our old drug testing policy. For anybody that was participating in athletics or parking in our facilities, they were required to subject themselves to random drug testing. With changes in the law and our ability to prove the need for such measures, we had to remove that policy. So that's why I'm looking to renumber the policy. Outside of that, the only thing we're adding to the policy is just vaping counts, just like drinking or other drug use for extracurriculars. Basically, all the other steps and everything else is in play.
Okay. Questions or comments about what will be known as 2271?
Look-alike drugs? Like a Tic Tac?
So, look-alike drugs is the attorney's way of the catch-all for anything, gives the district an incredible amount of flexibility.
I would say it does. Tums. I mean, like, is that what we're talking about?
Technically, yeah, Tums are over the counter. They should be administered to the nurse. We have some very outdated laws when it comes to medical administration. I know a parent of ours is working with some legislators to acknowledge some of the medications that students are receiving now and taking, and the outdated school code and how everything must come through a nurse.
Additional questions or comments?
All right, I'm going to start splitting hairs now because it's just fun to do sometimes. So, all right, so a couple weeks ago, I'm out traveling, right? And there's this gentleman that's on my team, and he hands me he's like, hey, do you want some gum? Sure, I'll take some gum. The gum has like B12 in it. The gum has like, it was like chewing on
Thank you,
a
Mr. Boyd.
vitamin.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, I mean,
Is it Nicorette? Nicorette, yes, that would be considered a drug.
not Nicorette.
I know,
No,
but you're talking B12. B12, we wouldn't.
I mean, but there were like minerals and vitamins and like, and there was like, stuff like you find in Red Bull and Monster Energy drinks and like in a stick of gum.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's-
I'm just, again, not to split hairs, but I mean, I don't know. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, anything in the world qualifies.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that's what we.
You know what I mean?
I thought that's what we were taking
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
There was going to be a carve out
There-
for coffee, tea,
There is a
soda.
carve out in the other one. I don't know what, it's the same carve out that was in the policy in 227, the coffee, tea, energy drinks. It's just not showing up on the
Okay,
draft
but
here.
maybe it needs to be carried forward.
Yeah, no, it does.
Yeah, and similar product, because I agree, Mr. Wagner's chewing gum probably should not be subject to disciplinary action.
Don't take stuff from other people unless you know what it is. I mean, anybody could give, I could be like,
Or
oh,
bring it
can
in
I,
yourself.
Can I have that pill because I have a headache? But I don't, unless,
It does give the
Yeah.
ability for the district to address anything that a child distributes that we don't know what's in. So we've had a situation this year where we did use that clause.
I actually have a concern from past experience in the classroom of the energy drinks. I specifically recall, and they were being sold up in the vending machines at the time. I don't know if they are anymore. But I had a
don't think
kid,
so.
first period, bouncing off the walls, heart racing, sweating, because he had already had 4 by first period. And I feel like there's, they were in his locker. The bottles were all there. Like, I feel like that's a health problem. It's a heart risk problem. What?
It's a valid point. I mean, like Panera Bread, if you want to do like the $15.99 or whatever a month, you get unlimited coffee and drinks. Do it. It's worth the $15. But part of that is the charged like lemonades that they just outlawed. Did you see that? Because there were unfortunately a couple people that passed away. They linked them directly back to that, and there were so your point is actually, I mean, I know it's like we're kind of like making light of. I mean, that's a legit situation.
So the issue with energy drinks goes back to the vaping. So how much caffeine's too much? Is a 12-ounce one too much? Is a 16-ounce too much? Are
Right.
Monsters okay? Is Celsius okay? Because
Right.
Celsius is the healthy I mean, we just can't get into that. I mean, there's so many. I mean, you can buy them anywhere.
Yeah,
Some of that's parent and family decisions, and we respect that.
okay.
Additional questions or comments?
I'm done splitting hairs, thank you.
No, I mean, Mrs. Brady, I agree with you. I mean, I think what the situation you're describing is an issue, but I'm struggling to understand how we draft a policy
Right.
that
No, I
says,
completely
my
agree.
cup
I
of French
appreciate-
roast coffee is okay, but your Monster or Red Bull isn't.
I appreciate
Yeah.
that, yeah. This balancing quantity is.
I mean, if
the-
we're splitting hairs, a couple lunches I bring in would be outlawed. So
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
a couple lunches that I bring in, depending. It's been a stressful spring.
Would anyone else like to discuss beverages or any other aspect of this policy? All right, then, without objection, and subject to the revisions that we've discussed today, we will move the newly renumbered 227.1 to first reading in June. All right, and then I think that leaves us only with 227, right? Or did-
No,
is
that leads us to 323 quickly. And the
Oh,
only
we're going
reason.
back up to the ones
yeah.
that are listed for
The
first reading.
only
Okay.
reason I'm going to 323 is the only reason this policy is here, because in doing our research on our student tobacco and vaping policy, we found that our adult staff policy was not updated. We only addressed tobacco. So we use the state's definition, as you can see right there, to include vaping. That is the only change outside of the superintendent does not necessarily report all these things annually to Safe Schools. We have a designee do that, so that is a change at the bottom. Otherwise, the only change is /vaping, and the definition. Just to be
Questions or
consistent.
comments about 323?
What is 323 versus?
That is our staff
Employees.
policy.
Staff, okay.
I have a question about it. There's a part about school-sponsored activities away from the school building. I think we can agree we don't want faculty members vaping or smoking when there are students around, but if they take a student away on a trip and everyone's back at the hotel, this policy will not be construed to prohibit people from vaping or smoking after hours when the students are in bed and they're down at the hotel bar or something. I mean, that's,
Would it, I mean, is it in there defined like a school-sponsored activity? I mean, that would be 24/7, I would think.
Yeah.
It would include that.
yeah.
We would interpret that as you're not supposed to be doing that well with students.
Whether
Like,
they're
when
asleep
you're
or not.
doing the overnight trip thing, that's kind of like 24/7 supervision. Like, if you signed up for that, that's kind of the expectation.
Yeah, I guess I'm just, in my opinion, that seems excessive. We actually just looked at this same policy at the CTC and put a carve-out in it for when students are not present. Thinking about at the end of the night when everyone's back in the room and you want to hit a vape in your hotel room, well, if you're an adult, you're allowed to do that.
Yeah, and you show up intoxicated in the morning, no go.
No, I'm not, I'm thinking more about vaping than anything.
I don't think employees would want to
We
take that
just-
risk when being in
Right.
charge, like in local parentis of, kids.
We also never know when they're going to be needed. So we had a overnight trip a couple years ago where in the middle of the night there was an emergency due to a student behavior
Yeah,
situation.
I remember.
Yes, so we want to make sure that staff member is able to respond and be in an appropriate manner to respond.
It's no different than an on-call healthcare individual that has to go out and make a visit at 2 a.m. in the morning and has been drinking till midnight to say, it's okay that they
I'm
were
not
drinking.
so much talking about that. I'm thinking more about the vaping piece of it. Are we really, if we're going to have a policy, then we need to enforce it. But I don't want there to be ridiculous enforcement of a faculty member or a coach is in their hotel room at the end of the night and they have a vape and they take a vape of nicotine because that's what they do. Well, they're adults. That's okay. I mean, I want to just,
I just feel like that's splitting hairs.
Well, I mean, it may be, but if we're saying they can't do it, then we need to be prepared to enforce that. If we're saying that there's a reasonable carve-out, then we need to understand that.
It seems to me that our administrators are very capable of taking care of that, or they don't volunteer to go if they can't go 24 hours without vaping. Or
I agree.
snorting
I think
or
the 24/7 is a good
chews or-
idea. I mean, at the end of the day, we're punishing kids for vaping in school, and then we're going to say teachers are okay to vape.
Well, I mean,
there's a
look,
hypocrisy
it wasn't that
there.
long ago, Mr. Maris, when we told kids they couldn't smoke, and the faculty smoked and was smoking, and the faculty left.
Well, it's
But
getting to
it's
be a
a new
while.
time.
It's getting to be a while now.
What?
It's getting to be a while.
Not really,
Yeah,
but
to me,
okay,
that
that
was
is
kinda
splitting
Like for
hairs.
some people,
So,
that's-
okay. The,
In
okay.
most hotel rooms, you can't even smoke in them, so it doesn't matter.
Okay, so 323, any objection to moving it to first reading? Or any additional comments? Okay, so we'll move 323 to first reading. And 709.1, surveillance.
So 709.1 is an extension of our security policy. This one specifically covers surveillance, which back when it was initially created was focused very much around security cameras. And we have a couple changes to it here. The first one was really designed to incorporate some changes that originally were covered, Dr. Musser, correct me if I'm wrong, in our transportation policy. So we cleaned up the language a little bit around district vehicles to include both district-owned and contracted vehicles, since we do have security cameras on our buses, even though we don't own them. So we just made it a little bit more clear that we potentially have cameras in any vehicle that the district may be operating, whether it's owned or contracted. And besides some additional wordsmithing and minor changes throughout here, the other major change is the addition of and cleaning up some language related to what I've termed other secure surveillance devices, which did not really exist or were not a thing when this policy was created. So looking at this as we kind of looked around at what the district is doing with different pieces of technology, we just obviously had an extensive conversation around vaping. We do have vape detectors, which, while obviously do not have cameras in them, they are a form of surveillance devices. So wanted to add a kind of a catch-all for other devices that are doing surveillance that we have in use in the district. That specifically right now, vape and THC detectors would be one, but didn't want to preclude other things such as audio-based detectors for different things, GPS monitoring and speed monitoring, which we do have in some of the vans that the district uses for transporting students. Basically adding some language in here to ensure that we're in a good place implementing those devices and the data that they collect for enforcement of district policy or state and federal law. So those are the two main changes, like I said, besides some additional minor changes in here. Welcome any questions if anyone has anything.
All right, thank you, Mr. Graham. Questions or comments about revised 709.1?
Do you think it's going to have to be revised again soon based on technology moving? I mean, or
I don't think so. Like I said, we left it kind of open with that other surveillance devices thing there. For example, we do not have a full-blown gunshot detection system, if you've seen any of those over the last couple of years, but we do have cameras that can do gunshot detection. So those features are creeping into a lot of other devices. This very much allows us to implement them as they come available and kind of find their way into other products.
Does any of this cover what might be used on district, say laptops, iPads, any of that?
No, this is solely around building security and physical security. Anything, content filtering and stuff like that's all covered under the responsible use policy and some of the other cybersecurity policies we have.
Additional questions or comments?
The only thing I will add, we did send this off for a legal review. That did not come back yet. I don't know if there will be any changes, but we did not get a final opinion on that yet at this point.
So pending legal review without significant changes, any objection to moving this to first reading in June? All right, and you'll let us know via board news if there's anything dramatic that develops. Okay. All right, that, I think, concludes all the policies that we have for this evening. I'll call everyone's attention to the schedule of upcoming meetings. Did anyone else have anything for the good of the order? All right, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Wagner, second.
Second.
Was that Mr.
Maris.
Mr. Maris? All in favor? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.